Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a homeowner association towed my vehicle while I was outside of the country and declared it as abandoned and got it crushed. I taught them a lesson. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. This is a pretty long story because I have to give information that took place over the period of about a year. I'm gonna just jump right in and start by saying that where I live in South Africa, it is common for people to just park in front of their own house. It has never been an issue, and since my garage is a huge mess, it makes it much easier for me and many others. I had to go away to Spain for a year because that is where my mother lives and she got very ill. I dropped everything in my life to go and take care of her for as long as it took. I was gone in total for about a year and expected that when I got home, things would be pretty much the same. I had been paying my bills, so I just expected cobwebs and maybe a bulb I forgot to turn off that died. Worst case scenario, something broke like the fridge while I was gone and I would need a new one. What I did not expect was to come home to my car just being gone and a ton of letters from my neighborhood HOA. I had my mail paused for obvious reasons, but they must have directly been shoving it into the mailbox. They also knew that I was leaving for an extended period of time, so it was not like a surprise for anybody. It was common to tell them so you could feel safe somebody was watching over your house. Going back in time to when I was in Spain, the HOA had met and decided on a new rule for the neighborhood regarding parking. They decided that people parking on the street was dangerous and made the roads look thin and not attractive to new buyers. They created a new rule that cars must be kept in people's garages so the streets would look better. From what I gathered, once I got home, was that people did not like this rule and it was heavily debated for months. At the end, the HOA got their way though and cars had to park in the garage. I will come back to people not being happy about it later. Since my car was just on the street due to me being on another continent, it was obviously not possible for me to move it to the garage. What happened next though, I only know because of one of my neighbors has cameras and saw the entire thing happen. One of the HOA members had come to my house and slashed all 4 of my tires, then proceeded to smash my windows in and basically make it look like my car had been abandoned. All my paperwork was up to date though, and a look at a car by a professional could tell that it was not abandoned. Still, it ended up getting towed, and in one of many notices I found out that it had been sent to a junkyard and had been crushed. I was angry about this and wanted to get back at the HOA for what they did to my car. I understand new rules going into effect, but they knew that I was not in the country and could not do anything about it. If they had just waited, I would have cleaned out my garage and put my car in it, even though I thought the rule was dumb. Now that they did that to my car, I wanted to make sure that they paid for even coming up with the idea in the first place. I had spent a year stressed out dealing with my sick mom and did not want to come home to even more stress to deal with. I was so glad my neighbor had the tapes to show what really happened just in case I needed it. I talked to people around the neighborhood and found out that I was not the only person against the rule and that they had been fighting about it for months while I was gone. I mentioned before people not being happy about it, and I found out the main reason why. The HOA had hired a towing company that would make money for every car it towed. Because of that, it was towing cars on site and roaming the neighborhood all day, every day. People talked about how they would be in their house for 1 minute to grab something and come out to see their car getting towed away. The rule was one thing, but they had taken this way too far. People had friends over that of course had nowhere else to park and got towed even though the rule was only meant to apply to the homeowners, not the guests. What they did to me might have been the powder keg that exploded everything because I was gonna sue the HOA. I had a pretty strong case because there are even laws about if people are gone for an extended period of time. I was supposed to inform the HOA before I left, which is exactly what I did. I was also not expected to maintain any rules that were enacted while I was gone for the obvious reason of me not being allowed to. That explained why they had to make my car look abandoned before they could technically get it towed away. I had proof though that my car had its yearly inspection and paperwork to show that it was being maintained. When they argued that it had slashed tires and broken windows, I was able to show the video that the HOA member was the one that did it in order to get rid of my car. The HOA would have been forced to pay the towing fee and repairs to my car, and the thing is that the car was crushed, so instead they had to pay to get me a car that is equivalent to the one I lost. This meant they could not get me a cheap old junker that barely worked and had to get me basically the same car I lost or the closest thing to it. I ended up getting the same kind of car that was a couple years newer than my old one. The HOA was overwhelmed because now that I had won with that rule, they had all started suing. They talked about how having the towing company roaming around was against the law, as well as towing guest cars when they are allowed to street park. Basically, they were swamped with lawsuits and they could not handle the pressure of everybody coming after them at once legally. The HOA president decided that he had to leave the position and most of the other members went out after him. It was a mess for a while until a new HOA team got appointed and had to deal with the angry neighborhood. The first thing they did was get rid of the new rule and let people park on the street again. They knew that it was not working and making more problems than it actually solved. They also broke ties with the towing company and they were no longer going to get paid for towing in our neighborhood. If there was a real need for towing, we would have to do it the old-fashioned way and call the police to take care of it. Things got back to normal after that and started to look more like it did before I left. I parked my new car in front of my house right where my old one used to be. I was mentally drained from everything that year took out of me between my mom and the HOA situation. Nothing could have felt better than after it all got sorted out to just be in my home and in my own bed. I could finally get my life back on track and hopefully have the next year be much easier. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm glad that OP at least got a little bit of justice because these HOAs are really getting out of hand. Not just in America, but also in South Africa. Either way, if you enjoy the HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously. Either way, the next one is titled Elevator Shenanigans. So I am a black man living in Eastern Europe. One fateful afternoon when I wanted to go down and collect something from a friend who was passing by. I press the elevator and wait for it to arrive. Elevator door opens and there is a couple inside, but as I try to enter, the man blocks the passage, telling me to wait for the elevator to return. Mind you, I am on the 7th floor and my friend was already waiting for me to come down. Also, the elevator has a fixed time before its doors close, which is about 20 seconds. So you will have to wait for the doors to close after you enter. But back to my story. I tell this man and his wife that I'm actually in a hurry and had to go down now. And he literally stands in front of the elevator entrance shouting, "No!" His wife tells him to let me in since there was still space, but he refused. I said alright and decided to use the stairs. Cue my petty revenge. I ran down the stairs, did not mind the cardio really, and pressed all the elevator buttons on all the lower floors. I got to my friend and collected my package and then ran back upstairs. On my way back up, I could hear the man cussing out inside the elevator and his wife's laughter. They had not even reached the ground floor yet. I felt so proud of myself. And yeah guys, that stupid man definitely deserved that. Good for OP. The next one is titled Mega Entitled Neighbor. I was just flipping through a few stories and reading about entitled drivers getting their just desserts. This made me think back to my days as a paramedic. We got a call to a house where there was a bariatric patient who had fallen. The patient was morbidly obese and weighed around 30 stone, which is 420 pounds. And by the way, who still uses the unit stone? That's so unusual in Europe. But anyway, this story is not really about them though. There are many reasons people get to this size and I've never judged, only helped. No, the problem here was a really arrogant neighbor we had come across before, and boy, was this chap a judgmental moron. Our patient had a car and had a disabled parking permit. They also had a council-designated disabled parking spot outside their home, which the neighbor kept parking in. There had been a number of letters from the council regarding this, and a number of parking fines just served to annoy this chap even more. On the day of the story, I took the call that the patient had fallen and we went to the house. And sure enough, the neighbor was not only parked in the disabled spot, but had parked a second car blocking access to the patient's driveway. I assessed the patient and suspected they had a broken hip, so needed to go in. I sent my colleague around to the neighbor to ask them to move the cars, and when they came back, I was told the neighbor had just told my colleague to do one. No problem, time to get the message home. I radioed through to our control center and asked for the fire service and police. We needed the fire service to help lift the guy and the police to do a little parking control. The fire service were the first to arrive and I spoke to the crew commander to let them know what the situation was. A fireman went to the house to ask the neighbor to move the car and was told the same as my colleague. The message was relayed back and the watch commander just asked me one question. Is the patient's life at risk? I knew exactly where this was going and it was time our thoughtless neighbor got the message. My answer was, yes, there's equipment I need to get into the house and the driveway is blocked, preventing me doing so. The watch commander told the fire truck driver to move those vehicles. It was really satisfying to see both vehicles being pushed down the road by the fire service, and the look on the neighbor's face as he came out spitting and screaming was well worth seeing. His complaints to the police fell on deaf ears. They were well aware of his history of obstruction, and my clinical assessment that the patient's life was in danger was more than enough justification for the vehicles to be moved. I doubt it made our patient's life any easier, and sadly they died a few months later without leaving the hospital, but it really did bring a smile to their face as we wheeled them out. And the next one is titled, You Cannot Get Everything You Want. For context, years ago, I, 20 female, and the father of my first 2 children, 26 male, were going through a rough time in our relationship. He was working night shift as a janitor in a nursing home while I was going to college for nursing during the day. We had a 1-year-old and I had just given birth to our son 3 months earlier. There was a woman that he worked with that I had gotten to know pretty well when I would bring him his lunches. We were friends, or so I thought. He was supposed to be waxing the floors at night when no one was up and about. It just so happened that my cousin ran into him and her having drinks at a local bar on one of the nights that he was supposed to be working. Cue a massive fight. Got off early, just friends, blah blah blah, won't happen again. About a month later comes the talk. We have been fighting too much, let's keep this amicable for the kids and stay friends. Mind you, the house was mine, I paid the bills with grants and scholarships I earned through school, the car he drove was mine as well. I would be nice and allow him to stay till he got something figured out, still take my car to work, and I still fed him all that good nonsense. Then he starts being loving and we continue a physical relationship. I happen to be feeding our son one morning while he still sleeps and his phone goes off. I know, don't look for it if you don't want to know, right? Turns out he's been carrying on a relationship with the other woman the whole time he has been with me. It would have been fine if that is what he wanted, if he wasn't doing the same with me at the same time. Cue petty revenge. I crawled back into bed with him naked and he snuggled up like he always does. I took pictures from his phone, nice and graphic ones. I sent them to her from his phone along with a very nicely, in my opinion, worded message explaining everything that he had been up to and into. Then I got dressed to the wonderful pings from his phone and continued about my day packing his things. He woke up a few hours later and went for his phone first thing. I happen to come into the room as he is trying to call her, and when he turns to look at me, I can see all the blood rush from his face. He cannot even mount a defense as I tell him all about the conversation me and his new girlfriend have had, along with some photos. All his things are now out on the porch, boxed up. I tell him he no longer lives in my house and to leave. He starts to blubber about where will he go. So I told him that he better call his girlfriend to come pick him up and live with her because he sure as hell is not using my vehicle anymore and that sounds like his problem, and I shut the door on him. I had been with this man-child for 6 years. I had given my body, heart and sanity to this man. Hell, I was even willing to still let him live there, not paying bills, eat there and drive my car for him to be sleeping with both of us at the same time. Was it petty? Hell yeah, but it was deserved. The next one is titled Revenge on the LowLife landlord who first deprived us of heat and later kept our security deposit. I was a kid back in the 80s, 2 years out of college when I moved into an apartment by the shore in New Jersey. When the cold weather arrived, there was always a few days when the apartment was cold and we would tell the super and then the heat would start arriving. One year, the heat started decreasing in February and inside the apartment it was like in the 50s and we had to start wearing coats. We told the super about it and nothing happened this time. We wrote the landlord about it and still nothing. So we checked with an attorney and learned about warranty of habitability and withholding of rents. So yet another certified letter to the landlord, and we start withholding rents. He files a motion to evict us and we answer with the Marini defense, depositing the withheld monies with the court. The judge finds in our favor for all the money we withheld. We continue to live there because there just aren't many other options as we save for a home. Flash forward to living there for 6 years. On the last lease, because we are about to buy a home, we write in a clause that we can break the lease with 45 days notice in writing, similar to his 45-day clause. They don't notice it because it is slightly obscured on the top left of page 2, so they sign off on it and return it to me. So in the middle of the lease we give the 45-day written notice, make the rent payments and leave. They don't return our deposit, so we sue for it, demanding double. They sue us for the remainder of the 6 months rent and refuse to return our security deposit. This is no longer a small claims court, but we proceed without an attorney anyway because they are expensive. We arrive at the courthouse and court forces a round of arbitration. The arbitrator says we will lose in front of the judge and to pay the rent remainderments. We refuse and wait for the judge. While waiting, the landlord's attorney drops by and asks why we didn't take the arbitrator's advice. So we tell him about the clause we wrote in, and he states he saw it too and that since it was crossed out, it is not part of the deal. We show him our copy of the lease where it is not crossed out and his face goes white as a sheet. He makes a call to the landlord, who then offers to properly break the lease with no penalty and return our security deposit in full. We refuse and we show him the certified letter stating that we would have accepted that deal up until yesterday, but that if you force us to come down to court, we want double damages of the improper withholding of the security deposit. He tries again to reach out to the landlord, but no luck this time. Then we go to see the judge. He looks at both leases and calls their attorney to the bench. The judge takes our lease and thrusts it towards their attorney and says, "This is the lease in force." Their attorney starts walking around the courtroom like a chicken with his head cut off, while I try to laugh as quietly as possible. The judge fines for us for double damages. We receive nothing for a week and I go back to the courthouse where the clerk says they should pay that judgment immediately and tells us about chattel execution and gives us that form. A couple of weeks pass and a check appears from the landlord. Another month passes and we get a call from the court. They have our money. I told them the landlord had sent a check a while back, so it is all good. She tells us that we should have informed the court that we got the money to stop the chattel execution from occurring. The court then sent the sheriff to their offices and confiscated the office equipment and sold it at auction to satisfy the judgment. They said, don't worry, they will just return the money to the landlord. That is the revenge, getting the money and having them experience the abrupt seizing of their assets at their place of business, having it sold at auction and then having the money returned to them. Major pro-justice. And Ripe Stars, if you ever had to deal with any awful landlords, please feel free to let us know in the comments about your own experiences. Alternatively, of course, I would very much appreciate it if you could post your own stories also on r/ripe stories on Reddit, where there is a good chance that I might read them in a video.